The moment my daughter-in-law leaned across the Thanksgiving table and told me I was a burden nobody asked for, the entire room went silent. My son's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. My grandchildren stared at their plates. The candles I'd spent 20 minutes arranging flickered in the draft from the heating vent, and I thought, very clearly, very calmly, she just made the biggest mistake of her life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. My name is Lena, and I'm 67 years old. I live alone now in the same house in Columbus, Ohio, where I raised my son, Griffin, from the time he was 3 years old. His father, my late husband Frank, passed away 12 years ago from a heart attack that came out of nowhere on a Tuesday afternoon in February. 1 minute Frank was shoveling the driveway, the next he was gone. Just like that. Griffin was 22 when it happened, just starting out, and the two of us leaned on each other hard through that first terrible year. We were close. We still were, I thought, until Tamsin came along. Griffin met her at a work conference in Chicago about 6 years ago. She was in marketing, sharp as a tack, ambitious in that particular way that makes a room feel smaller when she walks in. I tried to like her. I genuinely did. She was beautiful, no question. Dark hair, very put together, always dressed like she was going somewhere important, even when she was just picking up coffee. Griffin lit up around her, and that mattered to me more than anything. I want to be honest here because this isn't a story about a monster. Tamsin wasn't cruel to me in the beginning. She was just distant, polite in the way that keeps you at arm's length. Every conversation felt like an interview I hadn't prepared for. She called me Lena from day one, which I never asked her to change, but there was something about the way she said it. Flat, like a label. They got married 4 years ago in a small ceremony in the Smoky Mountains. Griffin's daughter, Piper, who was 12 at the time, was the flower girl. Piper is Griffin's child from a relationship he had in his mid-20s. Her mother moved to Portland years ago, and Piper has lived with Griffin full-time since she was 7. Tamsin knew this before she ever said yes to a date, let alone a proposal. Piper was part of the package. Or so I thought. In those first 2 years of the marriage, I noticed things. Small things that I told myself didn't add up to anything. Tamsin would suggest activities for the weekend, and somehow Piper was always at a friend's house when they happened. Family dinners at their place started happening less frequently. When I called Griffin, he always seemed to answer quickly, like he was somewhere he could step away from her. Once, when I stopped by to drop off a birthday gift for Piper, Tamsin opened the door, took the bag from my hands, and told me Griffin was unavailable right now. She didn't invite me in. I mentioned it to my friend Harriet. We've been close since our kids were in kindergarten together, and she said, "Lena, you need to pay attention to what you're seeing." I told her I was probably overthinking it. I wasn't. About 2 years into the marriage, Griffin called me on a Sunday evening and asked, very carefully, if I could help them out financially. They were trying to renovate the upstairs bathroom and kitchen, he said, and the quotes had come in higher than expected. I said yes, of course. I had savings. Frank had been careful with money his whole life, and I'd kept that habit after he was gone. I transferred $15,000 to Griffin's account the following week and didn't mention it again. 6 months later, it was the Ruth. Then Piper needed braces and their dental insurance had a cap. Then Tamsin's car needed replacing and the timing was bad, with Griffin's quarterly bonus delayed. I helped each time, not because I felt pressured. I want to be clear about that. But because they were my family, and I had the means, and that's what you do. What I didn't realize, or maybe refused to realize, was that the money was making Tamsin bolder, not warmer. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around last year, I had given Griffin and Tamsin just over $40,000 across 3 years. Not as a loan, as gifts. I never brought it up, never asked for anything in return, never even hinted at it in conversation. That was my choice, and I stand by it. But I noticed that my calls to Griffin started going to voicemail more often. That when I asked about coming to Piper's school play, Thompson said the seating was limited and they'd already given out the tickets they had. That last Christmas, I had received a gift card from a grocery store chain, the same kind the checkout clerk hands you when you return something without a receipt. The week before Thanksgiving, Griffin called to let me know I was welcome to come. Not invited. Welcome to come. He said it exactly like that, and I heard the difference, and I told myself it was nothing. I made my pecan pie. I always make my pecan pie for Thanksgiving. It was Frank's mother's recipe, and it takes most of an afternoon because the filling has to be done in stages or the pecans sink. I also brought a green bean casserole because Tamsin had mentioned once, maybe 2 years earlier, that she liked it. I was trying. I want you to understand that. I was always trying. I drove 40 minutes to their house in Westerville, parked behind Tamsin's new SUV in the driveway, and rang the doorbell because Tamsin had made it clear some time ago that I should ring the doorbell. Not knock, not use my key, which Griffin had given me years before, and which I still had, but ring the bell and wait. Tamsin's sister, Jocelyn, and her husband were already there when I arrived. So were 2 couples I didn't recognize. Friends of Tamsin's, it turned out, from her gym. 6 adults I didn't know, sitting in the living room I'd been to maybe 4 times in the past year. Piper ran to hug me at the door, and that alone made the drive worth it. Dinner was fine at first. The food was good. Tamsin had made a beautiful table, real cloth napkins, little name cards, a centerpiece with dried oranges and pine sprigs that she'd clearly put a lot of effort into. I sat at the far end, near Jocelyn, who was friendly enough. Griffin sat at the opposite end beside Tamsin. I kept glancing at him, waiting for the eye contact that would say, "I see you, Mom. I'm glad you're here." He smiled when he caught me looking, and I held on to that. We were about halfway through the meal when one of Tamsin's gym friends, a woman named something like Bree, I didn't quite catch it, asked how everyone knew each other. Tamsin glanced down the table at me, and something shifted in her face. She said very lightly, "Lena is Griffin's mother." That was it. No warmth, no story, just the flat fact of it, like identifying a piece of furniture. I let it go. Then Piper, trying to fill the silence the way 12-year-olds sometimes do, said, "Grandma brought the pecan pie. She makes it every year. It was great-grandma's recipe." Tamsin set down her fork. She looked at Piper and then at me, and she said, with a smile that didn't quite reach the rest of her face, "Piper, honey, not now." Like I had done something wrong by being remembered. I felt it. That thing in your chest that isn't quite hurt and isn't quite anger, but is right between the two. I took a sip of water and kept eating. It was when dessert came that it happened. I had gotten up to help clear the main course plates. I always help clear. I can't sit still while other people work. And in the process, I accidentally knocked over a small ceramic turkey that was sitting on the sideboard, a decoration. It didn't break, just fell on its side. But the sound made everyone look up, and I apologized and set it right, and that should have been the end of it. Thompson stood up slowly from her chair. "Lena," she said, and there was something in her voice I hadn't heard before. Not irritation, not coldness, but a kind of deliberate precision, like she'd been waiting for exactly this moment, and the falling turkey had given her the opening she needed. I don't know how to say this kindly, so I'm just going to say it. You have been a burden on this family since the day Griffin and I got married. You show up uninvited. You insert yourself into decisions that aren't yours to make, and honestly. She paused and looked around the table, like she was inviting agreement. You are the most exhausting person I have ever had to deal with. The table was completely still. I heard Piper make a small sound beside me. I looked at Griffin. He was staring at his plate. Every reasonable instinct I had told me to be quiet, to excuse myself, to get my coat and my pie dish and drive home and call Harriet and cry about it later. I am not a dramatic person. I've never made a scene in my life. But I stood there in that dining room, in front of a table full of people I barely knew, with Frank's mother's pecan pie sitting on that sideboard, and something in me just settled. Went very quiet and very clear. I set down the plates I was holding. "I appreciate your honesty," I said, "so let me be honest back." I looked at Tamsin directly. "In the last 3 years, I have given you and Griffin $40,000 for your bathroom, for your roof, for Piper's braces, for the car you drove here today." I kept my voice even. Calm. I wasn't angry exactly. It felt more like finally saying out loud what had been true for a long time. I never asked for a thank you. I never asked for anything. But if I'm such a burden, then you won't need me to keep writing those checks, and you won't. I picked the plates back up. I'll finish helping clear the table, because that's the kind of person I am, and then I'll go home. I walked to the kitchen. Nobody said a word. I heard Jocelyn cough. I heard one of the gym friends murmur something to her husband. I heard Piper say quietly, "Dad." And then I heard Griffin push back his chair. He found me at the kitchen sink, rinsing dishes the way I do when I need something to do with my hands. "Mum," he said. "I'm fine," I said, which was not entirely true. I didn't know she was going to say that. I turned off the water and turned around. Griffin looked the way he used to look when he was small and had done something he knew was wrong. Not the thing itself, but standing by and letting it happen. I knew my son. I had raised him alone for most of his life. "I know you didn't plan it," I said, "but you sat there, Griffin." He didn't have an answer for that. I didn't expect one. Not right then. I said goodbye to Piper, who hugged me for a long time and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. I nodded to Jocelyn on my way out. I left the pecan pie on the counter because I had made it for Thanksgiving dinner, and it was Thanksgiving dinner, and taking it home felt petty in a way I didn't want to be. I drove back to Columbus in the dark. That night I didn't cry right away. I sat in Frank's old chair in the living room. I still keep it there, still use it, still think of it as is even after 12 years. And I thought about the $40,000, not with regret, more like seeing a picture clearly for the first time after looking at it out of focus. I had been writing those checks thinking that generosity would build a bridge. What I hadn't understood was that Tamsin didn't want a bridge. She wanted me on the other side of one. I called my financial advisor, Wendell, first thing Monday morning. I told him I wanted to review my estate plan. He's known me for 15 years, steady, practical, not given to drama. And he just said, "All right, Lena, come in Thursday." I also called my attorney, a woman named Patricia, whom I'd worked with after Frank died, to sort out the estate. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but she remembered me. I explained the situation without too much detail, just the essentials. She listened carefully and then said, "You have every right to change your plans, and I can help you do that cleanly." I wasn't angry when I made those calls. That's the part that surprised me most. I felt something closer to relief, like I'd been holding my breath for 3 years and had finally let it out. What happened next I had not planned for. The following Saturday, Griffin called me. His voice was tight, controlled, the way it gets when he's managing something difficult. He said Tamsin was upset that I had brought up the money in front of everyone. I let a beat pass. "She was upset," I said. "She felt ambushed." "Griffin," I said, "she told me in front of your friends, your in-laws, and your daughter that I was the most exhausting person she had ever dealt with." I responded, "Those are two different things." Silence. "I'm not asking you to choose sides," I said, and I meant it. "But I am telling you that things are going to be different going forward. I love you. I love Piper deeply, but I'm done arranging my life around someone else's comfort while being made to feel like an inconvenience." He said he needed time to think. I told him to take all the time he needed. What I didn't tell him, not then, was that I had already spoken to Patricia and that my estate plan no longer included the provision I had added 3 years ago, the one that would have given Griffin and Tamsin access to a significant portion of my savings in the event of my passing. That provision was gone. The new plan left everything to a trust, with Griffin as a beneficiary in the way I had originally intended before the marriage, carefully, conditionally, with Piper named directly for her education and future. I felt peaceful about it. It was what I should have done to begin with. About 6 weeks after Thanksgiving, Piper called me from her cell phone. She was at a friend's house, she said, and she wanted to tell me something. "Grandma," she said, "I heard them fighting." I told her she didn't need to tell me anything. She wasn't comfortable telling me. "I know," she said. "But I want you to know," she was yelling at Dad. She said, Piper paused. "She said the only reason she ever had you over was because of the money. She said once the money stopped, she didn't see the point anymore." I was very still on the other end of the phone. "Piper," I said carefully, "you know none of that is your fault, right?" "I know." Her voice was small. "I just wanted you to know it wasn't true about you. You're not a burden, Grandma. You're like the only person who just shows up." I had to press my hand to my mouth for a moment before I could answer her. "I love you so much," I said. "I love you too," she said. "Are you still going to come to my winter concert?" "Wild horses," I told her. "Wild horses." I went to that concert. I sat in the third row and watched my granddaughter play the clarinet badly and beautifully, the way 13-year-olds do. And Griffin sat 2 seats down from me, and we didn't talk much, but we were both there. Tamsin wasn't. She had a work dinner, Griffin said. Griffin and I have been finding our way back to each other slowly. It's not what it was. Some things don't go back to what they were, and I've made my peace with that. He came to my house for dinner in February, just the two of us, and we talked for a long time. He didn't apologize for Tamsin, but he apologized for himself, for sitting there, and I accepted that because it was the part he could actually give me. I don't know what the future of his marriage looks like. That is not my business, and I mean that genuinely. I hope he finds his way to something good, whatever form that takes. I hope Piper has the stability she deserves. What I know is this. I spent 3 years trying to buy my way into belonging somewhere I had every right to simply be. I kept writing checks thinking that if I was useful enough, needed enough, generous enough, I would earn a seat at a table that should have always had my name on it. And when I finally understood that no amount of money was ever going to change how Tamsin saw me, I stopped. Not out of spite, out of the same clarity Frank always had about what mattered and what was just noise. I make my pecan pie every Thanksgiving now. Piper comes over, just the two of us, and we eat it for breakfast on the Friday after with coffee, which is absolutely something Frank would have loved. I tell her stories about him, the real ones, the small ones, the ones that don't make sense unless you know who he was. She listens like she's collecting them for later. Some things are worth more than what they cost, and some things cost more than they're worth. I think I finally know the difference. I keep thinking about what Piper said to me on the phone that night. "You're the only person who just shows up." She's 13 years old and she understood something. It took me 3 years to finally see clearly. I had been confusing generosity with strategy. Every check I wrote, I told myself it was love, and part of it was. But underneath that, if I'm honest, was the hope that being needed financially would translate into being valued as a person. That's not generosity. That's a negotiation I never admitted I was making, and it was never going to work, because Tamsin wasn't negotiating. She already knew exactly what I was worth to her, and she'd made her calculation long before that Thanksgiving table went quiet. What happened that night wasn't really about the ceramic turkey I knocked over, or the money, or even the words she chose. It was the result of every small moment I had let pass without saying anything. Every time I rang the doorbell, instead of using my own key. Every voicemail I left that went unanswered for 3 days. Every gift card from a grocery chain at Christmas. I had been telling myself those things didn't add up to anything. They added up to everything. Here's what I've come to understand about the way consequences work in real life. They're rarely dramatic or immediate. They accumulate. Tamsin was able to say what she said at that table because I had spent 3 years teaching her it was acceptable to treat me that way. Not because I'm weak, I'm not, but because I kept choosing peace over truth. And peace bought at the cost of your own dignity isn't peace. It's just a longer way of losing yourself. The morning I called Wendell and then Patricia, I wasn't acting out of anger. I was acting out of something clearer than anger, a kind of self-respect I had set aside and was finally picking back up. That's the thing about integrity. It doesn't announce itself. It just quietly requires you to act in line with what you actually know to be true. I knew for a long time that something was wrong. I chose not to name it. Naming it, when I finally did, was the most honest thing I'd done in years. What I hope anyone watching this takes away isn't to cut off the people who hurt you. It's more specific than that. It's this: the kindest thing you can do for yourself, and sometimes for the people you love, is to stop pretending you're okay with things you're not okay with. Griffin and I are finding our way back to each other precisely because I finally stopped pretending. There was nothing real to hold on to before that. I think about Frank sometimes and what he would have made of all this. He was never a man who said much, but he had a way of knowing when something cost more than it was worth. I think he would have seen it sooner than I did. I think he would have seen it sooner than I did. I think he would have set down those plates a lot earlier. I'm glad I finally did.